Welcome back to the Cognitive Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Ray, high performance coach, speaker, and author of The Cognitive Athlete. We're now in week 8 of the training cycle. So far, we've talked about energy, focus, capacity, and stress. But today, we're going to look at something that quietly shapes performance every single day. Something most people don't even realize is happening. Decision fatigue. Because in modern work, we don't just work harder than ever before, we decide more than ever before. And the brain was never designed for that. Let's dive into it. Think about your day for a moment. From the moment you wake up, you're making decisions. What time to get up, what to eat, which emails to respond to, what to prioritize. Then the workday begins. Meetings, more meetings, messages, lots of messages, loads of problems, and copious amounts of interruptions. Each one requires a decision. Individually, they don't seem like much, but over the course of a day, they start to accumulate, and eventually something happens. The brain begins to slow down. Not because you're lazy, not because you're unmotivated, but because the system that makes the decisions gets tired. Here is the reframe I want you to think about. Most people think performance is about effort. If something feels hard, they assume the answer is to push harder. But cognitive performance doesn't work like that. Your brain has something called cognitive bandwidth, which is simply the amount of mental processing capacity available at any given moment. And like physical energy, it's limited. Now, I'm about to geek you out with a bit of science. The part of the brain responsible for most of our thinking and decision making is the prefrontal cortex. It manages things like attention, planning, problem solving, impulse control, and decision making. But this system runs on finite resources. Behavioural scientists at Harvard and Princeton explored this idea in their research on cognitive bandwidth. What they found was striking. When people became cognitively overloaded, their effective decision-making ability drops dramatically. In some experiments, the effect is comparable to a 13-point drop in IQ. Not because people became less intelligent, but because their mental bandwidth was already occupied. The brain simply didn't have the capacity left to think clearly. Now, here is the interesting part. Cognitive bandwidth isn't just drained by those big decisions. It's drained by lots of small ones. Things like constant switch tasking, interruptions, information overload, uncertainty, and unresolved problems. Every time the brain switches attention, it consumes cognitive resources, and modern work is full of those switches, which means by the afternoon, most people are not operating at their best. They're operating on something called residual capacity. Let's give you a real-world example. I'm a big F1 fan, and this is a really high-performance environment. Last weekend, the season opened here in Australia. To the casual viewer, it looked like drivers are simply racing their cars at extreme speed. But inside the cockpit, something else was happening, and this is what really fascinates me. Modern F1 drivers are processing an enormous amount of information in real time. Things like tyre temperatures, energy deployment, brake balance adjustments, fuel management, tyre management, radio instructions, weather changes, and then strategy calls. And with the new engines, those hybrid engines coming in, drivers, and I can see this, they're having to make even more decisions about settings, boost, regeneration, more data. In other words, you can see it, more decisions, which means the cognitive load inside that cockpit is enormous. That's why drivers, they don't just train physically, but they also train cognitively. They use simulators, they have routines, structured processes to protect the decision quality. Because at 300 kilometers an hour, a slow or poor decision can end the race instantly, which you've seen with Oscar Piastri. Great, Clint, But most of us are not driving F1 cars. I get it. But the cognitive environment that many professionals operate in is surprisingly similar, just without the 300 kilometers an hour. We have back-to-back meetings, constant notifications, multiple conversations happening at once, decisions stacking on top of each other. And then you think about late in the day, someone asks you for an important decision, which is exactly when the brain is operating at its lowest bandwidth. So what happens? People default to easy choices. They delay decisions, or they choose the safest option rather than the best one. Not because they lack capability, but because their decision system is depleted. From a cognitive athlete's perspective, this is why high-performance environments protect cognitive bandwidth so carefully. In the RAF and aviation, pilots use checklists. In surgery, procedures are structured. And in elite sport, decision frameworks are practiced repeatedly. And the goal is a simple one. Reduce unnecessary thinking so the brain can focus on the decisions that matter the most. Elite performers don't just manage their time, they manage their decision capacity. All right, let's bring this all together. I want to give you an action checklist this week. And here's a simple 3-step checklist that you can apply to your work straight away. Number 1, identify your decision peak. Notice when your brain is clearest during the day. For most people, it's earlier in the day when cognitive bandwidth is highest. That should be when you place your important thinking, planning, and decision work, not late in the afternoon when your brain is already depleted. Number 2, reduce unnecessary decisions. A lot of cognitive fatigue comes from decisions that shouldn't require thinking in the first place. Create small systems that remove them. Things like standard meeting structures, clear routines for email and admin, simple checklists for repeated tasks. Every decision you remove protects bandwidth for the ones that actually matter. And finally, number 3, close cognitive loops. One of the biggest drains on bandwidth is unfinished thinking. When you finish a task or a meeting, take 30 seconds to close the loop. Write the next action, capture that decision, or you can just park the issue somewhere else. This frees the brain from carrying that decision forward into the next task. When you start protecting your decision bandwidth like this, something interesting happens. Your brain stops operating in survival mode and starts operating with clarity again. Because performance rarely collapses because people stop trying. It collapses because their cognitive bandwidth is gone. Okay, let's finish up. Decision fatigue doesn't mean you're weak. It means your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do. Conserve energy when resources are running low, which means the real performance skill is not pushing harder. It's protecting your ability to think clearly when it matters most. Because performance rarely collapses because people stop trying. It collapses because their cognitive bandwidth is gone. Next week, we will explore something that most professionals overlook entirely: recovery. Not as time off, but as a skill. Because elite performers don't just train performance, they train the ability to recover between it. And that might be the most important skill of all. If this episode resonated with you, make sure you hit follow, subscribe, and leave a review. It generally helps this podcast get to more people. And remember, train your brain the same way an athlete trains their body, with rhythm, recovery, and deliberate practice. I'll see you next time.